The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well. And you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month. And you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift. So if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years. They believe the law should serve everyone and not just those that can afford it. So for empathetic and expert legal support, call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Thursday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. This is our next week of election result recap. This episode we're doing Queensland and the great state of South Australia. And we're starting off in the Sunshine Coast. Huge result up there. To help me unpack that is the managing director of Enacta. You know him as a former secretary of the Queensland branch of the Labor Party. He's been on the show plenty of times. Great to have him back and under really, really happy circumstances as well. Evan Moorhead, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thanks, Stephen. This is the easiest podcast you've had to do. I was just trying to not gloat.
Oh, no. I encourage it.
It's pretty hard to not gloat about Ali France being the member for Dickson, though. That is pretty extraordinary.
I know. It's just there was so much good news happening that night across the entire country that this whole journey that I've been doing with yourself and everyone else that did the Path to 76 episode. It's going back again and recapping the night. It's been so much fun. And you might as well milk it for as long as you can, because eventually we have to get back to governing and all that kind of stuff. So I just sort of have been enjoying this whole experience. Let's just look at the party totals from Queensland to start with. On the primary vote, Labor had a 3.6% swing to it, which took its primary up to 31%. The LNP had a 4.7% swing against it, bringing it down to 34.9%. The two-party preferred, there was a 3.5% swing to Labor, taking Labor's 2PP up to 49.4%. Almost at 50%, and the LNP obviously at 50.6%. In our election preview episode, Evan, I asked you the question in terms of the life cycle of this current Albanese government. Was it now or never for Queensland voters to overwhelmingly support federal Labor? And for the first time in 18 years, they have done that. What a result.
Yeah, it is. Getting back to a position where there's now 13 Labor MPs out of 30 in Queensland's extraordinary effort, given how far we've come since 2013. And I think there's a space for us to go even further in the future, because I still think there's plenty of opportunities on the table in this result. Like, this is essentially getting back to 50-50 in Queensland, and it's been a chance for us to rebuild a Labor delegation to Queensland. Frankly, I think the more Labor MPs there are in that Canberra caucus, the better job federal Labor can do in Queensland. I think it's good to have those voices, making sure the parochial nature of Queensland politics is getting heard in those Canberra corridors.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you are right. There's a sobering reminder there that Labor's two-party preferred is still only 49, but it just shows you from such a low base that we were coming off there that we're jubilant that we picked up the seats of Brisbane, Griffith, Leichhardt, Bonner, Ford, Dickson and Petrie. Great list. But, yeah, you're right. It's still 50-50, isn't it? So that means there's still plenty of room to improve, which is, that's a positive way to look at it. Maybe later on we can talk about some of those seats that we can make some inroads in. What I do want to do is I want to cover off the seats we talked about in the road to 76 the other week, first of all, and then look at some of the seats we didn't talk about and get your reflections on those as well. But let's start with the seats we picked up off of the Greens, Brisbane and Griffith. Which one do you want to do first, Brisbane or Griffith?
Well, it's sort of both the same challenge in a sense. I think people probably enjoy Griffith more because of the Greens, overconfidence and sort of outrageous behaviour on the ground. But Griffith's an incredible opportunity where, I think it's that great space where, the Greens really did pay the price for attacking Labor, and missed the point that I think, even some of the most ardent Green voters still fundamentally want Labor governments but might want them to do better. And I think in Brisbane, second time round, Madonna was able to capitalise on it. It's sort of been pretty incredible that Bates, as sort of sitting Greens MP, didn't make much traction at all. In a sense, maybe I shouldn't feel sorry for Tories, but I do feel a bit sorry for old Trevor Evans in Brisbane. I'm not sure this was the election to be running in Brisbane as a former chief of staff to Peter Dutton.
No, well, even Peter Dutton worked out it wasn't a good time to be running as Peter Dutton in Queensland. The Griffith seat result was interesting in that, Max Chandler Mather III has obviously built himself a national profile. He would have expected normally to receive some form of a sophomore swing to him on his primary. He didn't. He got a 3 percentage point swing against him. Renee Coffey for the Labor Party got more than a 5.5% swing to her on primary. Everyone else really kind of didn't move at all. There was a 4.5% swing against the Tories as well. Just an outstanding result in Griffith. For the party.
And an incredible campaign on the ground too, right? Renee, you can really tell those candidates who thrive on voter contact, and I think Renee is one of those people. But I think also Renee's digital content was authentic and confident. I think it allowed her to be a real person in that digital market and do a really good job. I think I think the Max lesson is sort of a good lesson for all politicians, right? Is that, elections aren't about you, it's about the voters, right? That at the end of the day, voters are sitting at home deeply concerned about cost of living, and they're not really up for your performative behaviours, right? They sort of want you to get on and fix housing. They don't want you to have, the sort of political positioning. And
Mathers certainly was, I think anyway, in the electorate largely perceived as a barrier between someone getting a home or not because he was holding up that legislation. If you're at a Christmas, the Greens Christmas breakup this year, how do you think Adam Bant and Max Chandler Mathers are going to be getting on looking at each other across the table? He'd be looking at you, absolute fucker. You cost me my leadership. You sanctimonious fucking, I'd be giving him verbals.
Yeah, I reckon the Greens have a big existential problem, right? Internally they tell each other that they are on track to take over the world and run the government and be the new opposition, but that's sort of not where their voters are at. Their voters want them to get on and make politics better now. And so I think they sort of missed that. And what you saw in Griffith on the ground is Max ended up running these sort of two sets of messages, right? In the sort of South Brisbane West End part of the electorate, he would have bright green materials with the Greens Party logo saying vote Green to stop Peter Dutton. And then essentially in the sort of Balimba wealthier part of the electorate was running as though he was a teal, literally describing himself as an independent to voters, which I thought was this, I just think that sort of stuff is too tricky by half, right? If you look at, if you take what Paul Erickson said yesterday at the National Press Club, the key to Labor's campaign was having one consistent offering across the country rather than trying to be too smart by half and having different messages to different niche demographics. I just think the idea that somehow you can be a teal at one end of the electorate and a smashing capitalism at the other end of the electorate is sort of just, I don't think that's ever going to work.
Yeah, it's difficult to play both sides of the street, particularly in a really engaged electorate like Griffiths as well. It's a different kind of voter. Let's talk a bit more about the seats that we discussed last time, which was Leichhardt and Bonner. I walked away from the conversation that we had, particularly with Bonner. You felt really up and about Bonner, to the point that I was telling everyone to go put money on it. Not that I'm a gambling person. So they can thank you, Evan, for their sweet earnings on election night.
My dark horse
you were right, yeah?
Yeah. Like I think that sort of the low-profile incumbent MP, high-profile challenger, and I just think Bonner's one of those places in a demographic sweet spot for a Labor campaign like ours. And I think it's one of those places where it's like Cara, experienced local councillor. Like I reckon she's on track to get embedded there for a long while to come. It's sort of a lesson to campaigns, right? That Vasta's sort of incumbency of being there since 2000 he's sort of been there since 2004 with one break. In sort of 2007 to 2010 really didn't mean a lot. He hadn't turned it into anything substantial. It's a good pickup for Labor, and I think probably a good contribution to the federal caucus.
And I mean, not only a pickup, but Cara had almost a 10% swing to her on primary, and now holds seat by 8.3. Like it's not marginal anymore. It's not super safe, but it's in a comfortable kind of position that you think that you're going to get at least a couple of terms out of it. To your point, what about
particularly if someone so experienced as Cara too, right?
Say again?
Yeah, particularly like that incumbency. Like I think Cara's got the capacity to make incumbency work for her in a way that Ross Vasta didn't.
Yeah, nice. Love it. Leichhardt was the other one that I wanted to get your reflections on. We've got another really, really tall basketballer in the caucus now for our 5-on-5 midweek competition against the Tories. Matt Smith got elected. 9% swing to him on primary, 9.5% swing on two-party preferred. Just an absolute pasting.
Yeah, no, a fantastic result. And I'm excited by this to get Queensland Labor back representing regional Queensland as it should. A great campaign to put that big swing on. And I think it had a good campaign. I think sort of having Nita Green as the local senator on the ground to sort of establish the campaign voice and get it up and going with Matt. Having Matt pre-selected, someone high profile, someone who was up for a fight. In sort of regional Queenslanders want someone to fight for them, right? They sort of, and then I think sort of losing Warren Ench, who had sort of done that high profile space was a big opportunity for us. And frankly, the LNP pre-selected poorly. They had a candidate who had some weird and wonderful views, wasn't supported by half of the Liberal Party up there. And I think the other piece, also, Labor did a much better job of earning the votes in those remote Aboriginal communities of the Cape and Torres Strait. Do you,
probably unanswerable question here, do you think Warren Ench, if he does contest this seat a couple of weeks ago, does he think he holds onto the seat or he still loses?
No, it's sort of hard to say. But he probably would have one. Right? I think the issue is he's so high profile in that part of the world. He's dominated the media market, and it's and particularly has I don't think people should underestimate the sort of the work that incumbency allows you to build connections in those remote Indigenous communities of the Cape. They are just a different electoral contest to any urban environment you've ever thought about. They're remote, they're small, they really get the impact of government because, government plays a much bigger role in those places. I think, if you've campaigned in urban environments, you really are a world away from what politics means in Napranum or Weipa or...
Yeah. It was interesting talking to Ryan Neve last week for the Northern Territory debrief, particularly the seat of Lingyari, because he had speculated in the preview episode, if Labor can do the work it needs to do in those remote communities, then we're in with a chance of holding, because he was worried about Lingyari. He was worried that we would lose. And then I only recorded this episode with him the other day, and he was like, from what he'd heard on the ground, it was a great operation. They really did get out to those communities, engage with local Aboriginal leadership and turn out the vote in spades. And that's one of the two reasons that we had big swings to us in Lingyari. And to your point, it's not much different really in Leichhardt, in that northern part of the electorate, because it is so remote and so diverse.
Yeah, it's like in those electorates, organising matters more than urban electorates where you can pay for digital or pay for mail and those sorts of things. Like in those parts with Lingyari or Leichhardt, you just can never replace the on-the-ground organising.
Let's do the seats that we didn't talk about. I want to save Dickson to last, because I like how I used to eat my dinner when I was a kid. I always saved the best bits till last. Ford and Petrie, I don't think we even mentioned them. And even on election night, when I was zipping through the AEC's tally room page, I was only looking at all the seats that basically we had all talked about, and I didn't even. And then someone sort of thrown in to me at one point, "Oh, I think we're going to win Ford and Petrie," and I was like, "Oh, I hadn't even thought about that." Just a complete shock. Tell us what happened here.
Look, I think this is one of the places where the LNP really read the tea leaves wrong. Like these seats are both places where, state Labor has done pretty well in the past, and they, and sort of the federal Libs have done a much better job of winning over those sort of more working class voters. I think, in Ford, Rowan Holzberger's had, I think this is his third attempt, has run a good campaign, is a good campaigner. One of the most exciting bits about Ford is that it starts getting Labor a foothold into the Gold Coast. Ford has the bottom bit of Logan that's neighbouring Jim Chalmers' seat of Rankin, but then goes into that northern Gold Coast region. And I think if we're going to be viable Queensland political party in the future, we've got to have seats on the Gold Coast. And then Petrie, I got to say, Luke Howarth there took it for granted, I think. And I reckon probably, Luke Howarth is the one person who did, joint billboards with Peter Dutton's face all over it. I'm not sure that was the strategic decision that he thought it was. So, I think Emma Comer is going to be a great infection of new blood there. And I think that decision for Luke to, double down on the Dutton politics probably cost him the seat.
Let's not bury the lead. Let's talk about Dickson. It is fascinating, really, when you think about it. It's so unique for the leader of the major party to lose their seat, particularly, when they're in the opposition. I mean, I know it was amazing. It was historic for Howard to lose in Bennelong in 2007. But in some ways you can kind of add it up a little bit, because they were getting moved out of office, whereas they're trying to win office. So you would think that at least you would hold your seat despite whatever else is going on around you. But for you to lose your own seat as well was just remarkable. And I'm super interested to get your thoughts on what was the concoction that we'd built in Dickson that enabled us to achieve such a thing.
See, this is a really interesting exercise, right? Dutton is a pretty ruthless operator and has been prepared to do, for 20-something years, being prepared to do whatever it takes to hold on, even if the Liberal Party are losing, right? He sort of held on in 2007 by 47 votes. And he's been prepared in the past to do what it takes to, even sort of frankly throw his Liberal Party colleagues under the bus to hold on. Frankly, I think in this election where you sort of make yourself the question and your fitness to government the question, you can't then, throw the party under the bus. I think people at Dickson knew they sort of had a job to do. Like, frankly, like the people of Dickson had decided that they had a job to solve it for the rest of the country.
Obviously, Ali France recontesting for Labor would have helped us, right, in terms of she had a fair crack at it last time. She's obviously built a name recognition. She seems like a really credible and competent Labor candidate.
Yeah, she is, like, and an impeccable media performer, right? Like sort of a really articulate, great story, like lots of local branch support, and got a swing to her even in the face of it's like a high-profile independent trying to compete for the anti-Dutton vote. But like, so, Ali ended up increasing her vote while the independent ended up taking 12% of the sort of anti-Dutton vote.
Yeah, this Ali Smith, who was running an independent, who ended up getting 12% of the vote. What's her story? And I'm assuming, what was her how to vote card like? Was it an open ticket or?
Well, so this is one of the controversies during the election, right? Like, I think she sort of styled herself as like a teal style candidate, and ended up in sort of a position of the worst of both worlds. Ended up being accused by the Liberals of being a green activist in disguise. Then at the end of it, didn't actually preference Labor over Peter Dutton. Ended up running an open ticket for both Labor and the Libs. And I think there was a lot of discussions during the election trying to persuade her that, that behaviour was like a risk of getting Dutton back in. It's sort of a lesson to the independents. Like, you just can't be on both sides of an argument, right? Like, you're either for Peter Dutton or against him. You can't run as the community independent candidate to replace Peter Dutton and then not preference against him.
Because the Libs, Peter Dutton actually had a 7.5% swing against him. The Greens had a 4.5% swing against them, and the Independent obviously picked up 12. And it's not as simple as just switching those votes around, but you can see a bit of a pattern there of where people's primary vote went, and then we had a 7.5%, more than a 7.5% swing towards on our two-party preferred. So those votes that left both the Greens and the Liberal Party that sat on the Independent, regardless of how she wasn't directing voters to then allocate their preferences, we got enough to get Ali over the line. An absolutely outstanding result for Ali France and for the Labor Party.
Yeah, and for a seat that, sort of best results in the past ended up with slim margins, it's now a safe seat. I think the last time we won Dickson in 1998, people might remember Cheryl Curnow having a meltdown on election night because it was pretty close. I think, Ali's now got a safe seat at Dickson.
Yeah. I think Jesse McCrone mentioned doing a Cheryl the other night. I don't know if Cheryl Curnow feels about becoming a verb now, but we all remember that. Obviously, the last time we had a big chat about Queensland prior to the election was, that series that you and I and Jackie Trad did about the Queensland state election. It only feels like it was yesterday. I'm sure it was a hell of a lot long ago than that. But I just want to get a sense of, what does this mean for state Queensland Labor with these results, looking to the future in terms of potentially getting back into government at a state level next time around?
I reckon the message out of it is that the state Labor guys at October 2024 election left the Labor brand in pretty good stead in Brisbane. Like, to come in, 6 months after a state election loss, to pick up a swag of seats in Brisbane means that the campaign they ran in October 24 did a pretty good job of bolstering the progressive brand in Brisbane. I think there is still a bigger challenge, right? And so why I'm so excited about Leichhardt is, Labor in Queensland can only ever be successful if it has a regional base as well. And I think for a long time that was the truth for federal Labor as well. I really want to see Labor winning seats like Capricornia and Flynn in the future. Incumbency in those regional seats is really invaluable, right? Because they've got their own media markets. you get to be, yes, and sort of, as we saw with the Warren Inch discussion, you get to dominate that media market. But Labor really does have to get back into those places. It's sort of a challenge for us as Labor people to make sure we don't get into the echo chamber of urban politics. Paul Ericsson's speech yesterday to the press club was really clear that the Libs had failed because they'd only talked to the people who were already voting for them, already in their caucus, and listening to the Sky After Dark weirdos, right? Rather than listening to our own echo chamber is a risk. I think there's the job left undone is for Labor to be back winning seats like Capricornia, to win Longman, and get a foothold in the southern bits of the Sunshine Coast, Flynn. Those places should be back in the Labor family, because I think that also means we get more regional voices in the Canberra caucus too.
Well, certainly, picking up all the seats that we just talked about today, it means there are more resources for Labor people to build on, and that's a good thing. And I'm sure that Kate Flanders, the team at head office, will be working closely with all of those folks to make sure that we can start to build on that ahead of the next state poll. But there's a chance, actually, you think about it, I'm trying to do the math, there's a chance that we would have another federal election in Queensland before we would have another state election. Would that be right?
So 2028 in Queensland is going to be a festival of democracy. We're going to have council elections in March 2028, on track for federal elections in May 2028, and then a state election in October 2028.
Oh, man. Full on.
Well, I reckon it's time for their Labor to have essentially one campaign in all those markets. The idea that you're sort of going to have a separate campaign for each of those is a bit ridiculous.
Yep.
I think we're going to have, it gives us a good chance in that year to build a big activist base and keep it rolling.
I don't know, we've talked about this on the show before. Maybe David and I spoke about it, but if you had a magic wand and you could just ignore the federal constitution and actually just make changes in such a way, I would have 4-year terms for our federal elections and just say they happen on every even year. So the next ones would be 28. 2 years later, and it's always the last Saturday in November. 2 years later, all of the states go at the same time, and the territory on the last Saturday in November. And then 2 years later, you go back to the federal polls. It's a 4-year cycling around. But just because I just think that it creates this for the voters, they all know, I'm going to be voting every 2 years in something. And it's always the last Saturday in November. I think the uniformity of our election system would be so much better. And also, as we know, the Greens and the Liberal Party don't like to get stretched. And if you have all of the state elections go at the same time, it forces them to pick and choose where they're going to allocate their resources. Whereas us, we have a lot of people. We need more. We always need more. But I think that's a strength that we should work towards, and I think that would be a great thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think we've seen the Greens the Greens sort of lower house strategy has been to, peak in certain places and sort of fly resources around the country to try and peak in a small number of inner city seats rather than have a big argument for government. Because essentially, I've seen the nonsense from the Greens about their primary vote increase and all that sort of stuff. But essentially when it comes down to it, in places where people had to make a serious decision about the Greens in the lower house, they said no, right? That's not the point. But having those elections in a way which means the Greens can't be opportunistic in a small number of seats rather than run a bigger campaign to persuade the community is I think, generally a better for Australian democracy.
Yeah. Well, I can't fix the federal one because that has to be a referendum, and we know how good we are at those. But certainly the states could get their shit all together and say, let's all just move our elections to be on the same day. I think that would be a smart thing for us to do, but we can only hope and dream. Evan Moorhead, thank you so much for your time today. Great to talk to you under such wonderful circumstances.
A win for the good guys.
Indeed. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
Okay, let's take this episode back to a state that I lived in for 5 years. And I remember when we were doing the preview episodes with Feeney and with Jesse, David Feeney had said there's no way in hell that the Labor Party are going to pick up Sturt. I can't see them having 7 out of the 10 seats. And then obviously when we came back and did the election night coverage, David was like, well, I've got some humble pie to eat because that was a great result in South Australia. And to help us unpack that, we're joined by our good comrade in Adelaide, Matt Clemow. Huge result in South Australia on election night. You guys must be buzzing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just following on from what you just said then, Stephen, I think the biggest take-out is not only does Labor hold 7 seats in South Australia, they hold 7 safe seats in South Australia. I mean, starting from Sturt at 6%, seats like Adelaide, which you would understand very well at 19%. And then we moved to the Republic of Rishworth. Kingston's now a 20% seat after being not ours in 04 through to 07.
I know, it's huge. I went back and looked at all of it because there's only 10 seats. It's not that hard to look at the entire electorate of South Australia, particularly the Adelaide one. Trish Worth, the Liberal, held it from 93 to 2004. When Kate Ellis won it off of Trish, it was a close run thing, and it still was a marginal seat for a number of terms there. And now I know there's been redistributions with Port Adelaide being amalgamated into a bunch of those sort of inner metro parts of the city. But even still, it's phenomenal to think that Adelaide now with Steve Georganis is on has got a 20% buffer.
Yeah, and I mean, that 2013 campaign that you would have been a part of, we were running around hanging up "Let's Keep Kate" corflutes, under the Labor Party ones. With a significant fear that we would only have 4 federal seats out of what was then 11.
Such a turnaround. Let's look at the state totals for everyone playing along at home. The primary vote for Labor is a 3 at this point in time anyway, there's still about 10% of the vote to be counted, but 3.9% swing to Labor on primary. Which takes our primary up to 38.3. There was a 7.1% swing against the coalition, taking their primary down to 28.4. Looking at the other totals, not really much there to report at all. But on a two-party preferred, there was a 5.2% swing to Labor, taking our two-party preferred up to 59.2 and the Libs down to 40.8. What a result. Shall we dive into, is there anything else you want to reflect on at a statewide level, or do you want to jump straight into having a look at some of the seats that we talked about in the Path to 76 episode?
Pausing back to the almost was. There's a pathway where the outcome for the Libs could have been worse. Grey has ended up. It's ended up being, I think, 6% against the independent, but that's only because the independent finished 1% behind Labor on second. Labor ended up getting, enormous swings to it in places like Whyalla. If that hadn't been the kind of popularity of the state prosperity plan, independent would have run second. And the SA Libs would have one member of the lower house in Tony Passon.
It's just crazy. It is absolutely crazy. Such a turnaround.
It's a long way back. It's a long way back.
It really is. It must be grim reading for the South Australian Libs at this moment. And their party itself at a state level is in turmoil as well. So good. Okay, Sturt. We picked up Sturt on election night. Tell us about Sturt.
Yeah, when we spoke last time, I'd said that there was a very strong view that the Premier's popularity in what is a deeply conservative area was really playing a role. Now, as it turned out, as the rubber band broke federally, we have seen those crazy swings elsewhere. But, I was always of the view that we would end up there. When you look at it and say, ended up there by 15,000 votes, that probably wasn't where I was at when we spoke last. I think just going back to a statewide level, only because it's kind of, it tells a story of Sturt. There are 321 polling places that we counted on the night. So if you leave out the hospital booths, etc., 321 polling places in metropolitan Adelaide, and the Libs won 2 of them. One at One Tree Hill and one with the good people of Unley Park in the middle of Boothby. But on the night, they didn't win a single booth in Sturt. And, if you go back through kind of areas that you're aware of, Linden Park, which, it's immediately just north of the Burnside Shopping Centre, as blue ribbon as you would find, where they ended up in the final count. It's a 4% swing to Labor, a 15% swing against the Libs, with an independent taking 10. And that ended up that in Linden Park, Labor won on primary, 34-9 to 33-9, getting you to a 2PP of 60-40. Now, you understand SA in a fair way. Like, these are the safe, to use a state seat example, these are the safest metropolitan Liberal seats in the state. This is Hawthorn and Kew kind of areas, and you've got in a federal election losing booths like that 60-40. The national listeners probably understand where St Peter's is. It's literally the place where the avenues are named in order. Only a 3.4% swing to the Libs, 5% away from Labor, also a swing away from the Greens. Labor ended up winning St Peter's 51-49. If you're not winning there, you're not winning anywhere.
No.
But if you are winning there, you're a long way down that ladder. You're a long way down the list of the places that you were intending to win. There was quite a lot of uniformity across Sturt. I think it goes back to kind of the conversation we had last time, that it's not just every young voter coming on the roll at about 1090. For the kind of conservative side, but there's an enormous gender problem still. I wasn't in Sturt on polling day. I was in Adelaide just to maintain that 19% at the Gilly Street Primary School.
Well.
My colleague Brad Green, who he was in Sturt. His view was that it was as gendered as the last state election here, and it was really only those white blokes over 50 who were the vehement Conservative supporters, and there was no one else going anywhere near them.
It's just amazing to consider that the way that Dutton has set up the party post Morrison in such a way that traditional, blue ribbon Liberals of a certain generation have just walked away from the party. And what's even more inconceivable is that they've come to vote for the Labor Party. I mean, I know that a lot of them probably gave their their primary vote not to the Labor Party, but there was still a 4.5% swing to Labor on primary. But the Liberal primary collapsed 8.8%. Verity Cooper, the Independent, picked up 7.2, and then Trumpeter Patriots picked up 2.2. Family First picked up 1.9, but otherwise, almost just under a tick under 5 points came to the Labor Party. There are people who are rusted on Tories when Labor won because of the way that Dutton has positioned his party nationally. And I think there's that old Liberal in Adelaide have gone, that's not who I'm about. That social conservatives stuff, they're just not buying into.
Yeah, and I do think, particularly in the Sturt, I'm just going to Boothby in a sec just on the gender stuff, but particularly in Sturt, there was a view that there was people feel completely safe with Premier Malinauskas, and I think in terms of that, voting Labor won rather than parking your vote. There's a very strong carry-on from there that there is anyone who has been traditionally a Lib voter is not frightened by having faith in the kind of Malinauskas brand of Labor. And I think if you overlap that with the kind of competence of the Fed campaign, that's probably of no surprise. Just going over to Boothby for a second, they'll probably understand have had more post-election conversations in a Boothby sense. Louise Miller-Frost ends up with a 7.79, 2PP swing to her, ends up winning by 25,000. Now, this is a seat that pre-cyclone, the Libs were $1.80 to $1.90 favourites in. So, to lose a seat by 25,000 votes that you were favourites in, there's an enormous kind of professional woman vote in that seat of Boothby. It's Glenelg, it's Brighton, it's everything there that had been traditionally enough to kind of get Andrew Southcott over the line. It's an area where I spend a whole lot of time in in a in a kind of professional sense, and a whole lot of people that I work for. There was an independent last time, Joe Dyer ran, so kind of the vote's a little bit skewed. But you look at a booth like Brighton South, Louise Miller Frost has a 13.3% primary swing to her to end up on 47% primary. And even without the independent being there, there's a 2% swing against the Libs on primary from last time. Go to a seat like Brighton North, 16% to Labor, 11% away from the Libs. Now, not only does that mean that they have an enormous problem with everyone who's come on the roll from last time, but it also means that, rather than a world where people weren't as frightened of Dutton as they were of Morrison, more people have left them since.
Yeah, I mean, Boothby's interesting because, I think we were in the preview show, we were kind of like, oh, Nicole Flint, Liberal Party running again. What's this going to mean? Louise Miller Frost, how many people really actually know her? Is this going to be a challenge to try and hold on to? And not at all. Like a 10% swing to Labor on primary, taking up to 42% in Boothby is just remarkable. I would
argue there is a little bit of rubber band breaking there. If polling day was the first day of the campaign compared to the last day of the campaign, would that have been quite as heavy as that? But I think, I think some of the best commentary since has been that what are the cohorts that the Libs still have that are voting for them consistently, and they keep on turning away another group of 20% and another group of 10% and another group of 10%. And I think that's what really shows in Boothby that those in Boothby and Sturt who have voted Liberal are that last little bit of rusted on bloke, a block of either a significant age or that kind of white guy over 55.
Yeah. It's funny, because if you look at the wealthier parts of Boothby that you just mentioned, like around Brighton and Glenelg, or broadly speaking, the seat of Sturt, it is ripe in this modern sense for like a teal type independent to run and grab that type of vote. And I think what frustrated me a little bit in 2022, here from a Victorian perspective, is we ran a competitive race in Higgins and won. Yep. We didn't run a competitive race in Kooyong. The Teals got it, and we didn't run one in Goldstein. The Teals got it. And I actually thought that if we had actually pre-selected good quality candidates, we could have been in the hunt to pick up those seats as well. In South Australia, I know that there have been independents that ran that. Who was it? That Cooper that ran in.
Verity Cooper's a eastern suburbs GP, but that was probably a bit more crowded with the Greens. The Greens were buoyed by the Dunstan by-election and the Bragg by-election, and we're kind of, can we get ourselves from 15% to 25% and therefore we can come competitive? What actually happened is an independent came in the Green space. Yeah. And where the Greens would have gone from 15 to 25, they ended up with 15 and, kind of independent stealing 10 of that in some areas. So it became proper four-way contest rather than three-way contest. Oddly, that's a little bit what happened off Broadway here, but a little bit what happened in the Waite state by-election last time, where you had a local mayor and a Lib and Labor and a former Lib all at the same time, and it kind of, that's where Labor was able to win against the odds there. But I think in a broader independent sense here, I think probably comes down to the candidates that Labor had put there, meaning there wasn't room for an independent almost. Louise Miller Frost, former quite high-profile chief executive of a whole lot of NGOs here in the homelessness space and a whole lot of other things. Claire Clutterham, senior lawyer, counsellor, they both probably have the professional skill set that you would have been trying to have as an independent coming in against a 20-year-old Labor candidate or something like that. I think Labor's ability to pre-select really well crowded out the opportunity for an independent to be in there.
Do you reckon
doesn't take away the risk for what's next by any stretch?
No,
but it certainly took away the risk in 2025.
Might not know the answer to this, but I do wonder if Climate 200 had considered sourcing and running candidates in those types of seats in Adelaide.
So I'm not aware of any conversation in Boothby at all, but there was not only a push in Sturt, there was almost a little bit of a can't remember whatever the New South Wales seat was that kind of advertised for their independent, saying these are our values.
Yeah.
There was a very similar public push in Sturt to be able to say, we want someone who shares these community values to go run on this kind of ticket. And then it ended up being the kind of GP who kind of stepped into that void, but not quite in a climate sense.
Interesting. Okay, very good. Love it. The Senate. We had a great result in the Senate in South Australia as well.
Extraordinary result. I mean, I know, Xenophon changed a couple of elections in an enormous way, but there have been times when we have been legitimately fearful of getting 2 in the Senate, and we've ended up with 3. I don't have the figures in front of me here, but offhand, pretty sure it was 2.7 quota. We got 2. The Libs got stuck on 1.93. If the Libs had been higher, then I think we would have had a One Nation senator in that third spot. Certainly if Labor had been 2.2, 2.3 or anything that would have been a high water mark before the cyclone and certainly would have taken it in any way. But 2.7 has ended up in a scenario where Charlotte Walker, who was introduced to the Labor Party 2 years ago, the now Speaker, former Labor member for Mawson, who's currently an independent whilst he was Speaker, tells a story that he met Charlotte at the Yankalilla show down near Victor Harbour a couple of years ago, and she said she was interested in politics. He gave her work experience in her office. She had a day off so she could go to schoolies whilst she was working in his office. She ran third on the ticket, ran a really strong kind of Southern Fluoro campaign. She turned 21 on election day and was elected to the Senate. So it's just an extraordinary story.
Unbelievable. Yeah, your numbers are right. 2.66 quota for Labor. It's a swing of 5.8 to Labor, taking our primary up to 38.1. And the Libs, their quotas down to, they had a 6.3% swing against them. They got 1.9 quotas. Managing to take
this is a world where David Fawcett was elected at 3 on the ticket in 2013, and you would have thought in a pre-Christmas sense they would have been trying to get us down to 1, Greens and a One Nation, and them at 3, and they've ended up 2. Greens probably a little bit lower than you would have thought, but that probably explains where our 2.66 comes from compared to say 2.3, 2.4.
Yeah. The Greens, it's been really interesting doing all of these post-election state-by-state analyses with folks like yourself. Just the results of the Greens, both in a Senate result by each state and at a seat-by-seat result, for them to get up on election night and say, or even in the days after, we've grown, like trying to polish a turd. They've just basically, nationally, they've sat pat, essentially. Like they had in the Senate, they had a 0.9% swing to them. Their vote now is at 12.9 in the Senate. And their state totals for the House of Reps really didn't move much at all. And that's been their story for, it's 12% nationally. On a primary, the swing of right now statistically 0. Yet they lost 3 seats. They only just hung on in Ryan, and where they historically have done well, their national vote never really moved. But in concentrated areas like seats like Melbourne, we saw huge growth. Like Adam Bant almost won on primaries 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just been such a shit campaign for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that meme that has the 3 people on the Olympic dais, and it's the Greens drinking champagne but sitting in the third spot. So look what we achieved from here. But I think what is so clear is so much of the Green vote that we've seen through that ban time, etc., has been people parking away from the 2 major political parties. And where there is any choice to vote for someone who's not Labor or Lib, but also not Greens, people are running towards it. And then what has been so stark at this election now is where Labor has taken the Greens on, people have shifted votes back from the Greens and parked it to Labor. Now, as you know, I do a whole lot of work in the housing space. We can be as revisionist as we'd like, but, that's what happens afterwards. But, the fact that both housing spokespeople lost their seats, I think is as telling as the fact that both leaders lost their seats, that people will blame you for blocking. People will blame you for not being a party of government. I think, history has shown you can be there on separate issues. As soon as you start to put yourself up as a larger party and go from that 15% to the 20%, people expect you to start behaving in a very different way. And I'm not sure what happened there. I was just looking at like a booth like Belair, which is Hill Face here, top of Boothby. Labor's always found it really hard, and Labor's always bled votes to the Greens there. You got a 20% swing to Louise this time to end up on 46.4% primary. The Greens have got an extra 6% to 26, and 11 have come off the Libs. But they are the booths where we should probably be level on primary with them and the Libs sitting third. And there's a clear difference in those proper tree change affluent suburbs that our primaries outstripping theirs easily.
Yeah. It's tough. It's tough when you move from the kids' table to the adult table. We need to have your head on a swivel, and they've been caught out on this one. Yeah,
and I mean, they have significant structural problems. I mean, I think the entire part of is it an environmental party or is it a bit of a elitist party? As much as the Libs are fighting two kind of battles as to who they are, I think that's true for the Greens. You've got some really, really senior, highly regarded members, and then a whole lot of young kind of kids at the other end. All the problems that we have faced before and we will face again, and that's why we can't get ahead of ourselves. And it's all about governing well.
I think it also helps broadly, though, that we often forget that our party is a pre-federation party. The Australian Labor Party has been around for a very, very long time, and with that comes history, and with history comes lessons. We've split multiple times, and obviously the last one now was a long, long time ago, but there are still reminders that we need to remain as big a tent as possible whilst being true to our values and accommodating different opinions and different views.
Yeah, and there's a North Star which is easier for us to target than there is, the parties that are there to not be us, essentially. We know who we are. There's always a North Star, and then it becomes a metro versus peri-urban challenge, or it becomes a policy challenge, or it becomes each of those things. But I think even more so with the fight for the right in a kind of Lib sense, makes it even clearer who we are there for and who we have to be there for.
Someone said to me, a good friend of the show actually, I won't name them, but that they'd said to me after the 22 election when we won Higgins, they were like, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable that we're bringing in a whole bunch of Tories into our voting base. Like, I don't know if that's the party I want to be a part of. And I was like, I don't give a shit. I just want to win elections. If we get bigger and bigger and bigger, I'm pleased about that. And obviously the results in Sturt are an indicator that we're bringing in different types of voters. And I'd like to hang on to those voters going forward. That's sort of, particularly like when you think about the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, there's a whole bunch of seats that 2 or 3 cycles ago we weren't winning. And when we did win them, it was like, we'll only hold them for a term. But now history's shown that we can hold them on for multiple terms. I'd like for that to continue to be the case. Can you get your reflections on this idea about our voting base and how it's changing over time?
Yeah, I mean, I'll look at that twofold. One, I was going to name someone then, but I thought better against it. A very high-profile former South Australian politician used to argue internally that we would turn away high-earning white-collar workers by essentially saying we're not yours, and there are a world of progressive-leaning legal firms around the country, and they align with our values. Just because they earn a little bit more, they shouldn't be turned away because of where it is that they live. In the same sense, we have a whole lot of working class people who just happen to be in liberal areas because of removal of industrialisation or whatever, have become safe seats. I think it's more about we need to turn up and be able for people to vote for us and to seek people's votes in areas where we haven't traditionally been. And all of my experiences were really pleasantly surprised when we actually offer people something in an area where they haven't voted for us previously.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the structural stuff on top of that to go to your point that I saw COS's figure last week was another 700,000 people will come on the roll by 2028. If we know these people are coming on a 10% Conservative primary and then all of the rest is up for grabs, of course we want to be their natural party rather than telling them to go to the Greens and come back to us later, or allowing them to go to Libs. And if we've gone from a 45% gender primary to a 55% gender primary, we need to maintain the faith of that 10% to make sure they stay with us. It can't just be sit and wait until the other side gets its shit sorted.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, mate. All the best. Thank you very much for your time, not just in today's episode, but the one leading up to it as well. We appreciate your insights. And there's going to be a South Australian election next March, so I feel like we'll be talking to you again.
All right, talk soon.
Cheers. Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.